Today's case involves the brutal murder of a vibrant, beautiful young woman on a secluded beach in Australia. It's a complex story full of twists and turns, with the brutality of this crime leading to the discovery of so many dark secrets harbored by those in Toya's inner circle. After considering a laundry list of potential suspects, investigators were brought to one man, someone that no one could have ever suspected and who still casts a shadow of a doubt even after detectives thought the investigation was over. Hello everyone, my name is Rachel and I want to welcome you all to another true crime video, or if you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we discuss all sorts of true crime cases that I haven't seen covered by anyone else or I've seen very little coverage of, because even the lesser covered cases deserve to be shared. If that sounds like something you're into, please consider subscribing if you haven't already, or if you prefer other platforms, you can also find my content on Spotify. Just search up True Crime with Rachel Shannon and you'll see me. With that being said, let's get into today's case. Toya Cordingley was the daughter to Troy Cordingley and Vanessa Gardner. Those who knew Toya described her as the kindest, most caring, and beautiful soul you could know. She loved helping people, which drew her to working at a whole health pharmacy in her adult years. But beyond that, she had a deep passion for animal welfare, which started when she was just a little girl. Over the years, she fostered many cats and dogs, helping so many pets find homes with their forever families. She also worked and volunteered at animal shelters. Those who worked with her said that she just had a way with even the most scared, anxious, or even aggressive animals. She was able to calm them down within minutes. Others said that Toya always enjoyed being outside, going to the beach, and being with her friends. She was also a Harry Potter fanatic. Overall, Toya just seemed like such a vibrant young woman who was loved by so many. At the time, 24-year-old Toya had been in a 3-year-long relationship with Marco Heidenreich. The two were living together with her dog Indy in Cairns, Australia. According to Marco and everyone who knew them as a couple, they had a loving relationship. They shared a deep love for animals, which really connected them. By the afternoon of October 21st, 2018, CCTV footage captured Toya at Rusty's Market, where she bought some groceries. At the time, she was wearing a light-colored crochet top, blue shorts, and carrying a large striped bag. After the grocery store, she picked up her dog Indy and then headed off to Wangeti Beach to walk her dog, arriving by around 2 p.m. It was only supposed to be a 40-minute walk on the beach, but as the afternoon turned to evening, Marco noticed that she was out a lot longer than she said she would be. Marco had been off with a friend that day, ending up at the friend's home that evening. I'll describe a bit more about what else he was doing that day in just a few minutes, but by that point in the evening, the friend said that Marco started to become upset and frazzled, saying that he hadn't heard from Toya much at all that day. After this, Marco left his friend's house, but on his way home, he noticed that Toya's car was still parked at the beach, and this was hours after she said she was going there. He went to the car and found that it was unlocked, and Toya was nowhere to be found. This obviously concerned him, so he got out and started looking around to see if he could find her. It was dark at that point, though. I think it was around 10 p.m. already, so he knew from the jump that if he didn't see her pretty much immediately, that searching in the dark by himself wouldn't do much good. After being unable to locate Toya within a few minutes of searching for her, Marco called her mom, Vanessa, to let her know that he couldn't get a hold of Toya and didn't know where she was. He said that he found her car at the beach but was unable to find her. So that night, Vanessa left her home to pick up her son and Toya's brother Jack, as well as Toya's father Troy, and they headed to Wangeti Beach. By around 11 p.m. that same night, Marco also called the police to report Toya as missing.
That Sunday, the 24-year-old attended Rusty's Market at 12 p.m. and left for home around 1 p.m., crossing the intersection of Sheridan Street and Spence Street. Toya travelled north towards Northern Beaches, passing through Clifton Beach at 1:58. Toya's vehicle was sighted at the southern car park of Wangeti Beach after 2 p.m.
By the time everyone arrived to the beach, like I said, it was already pretty dark and late by that point. So they actually waited for the sun to rise, but as soon as it did, the desperate searches began. Pretty quickly, Vanessa actually spotted Toya's dog, Indy, tied to a tree. Indy was thankfully unharmed, but she had been tied to the tree so tightly that she couldn't even sit down, and she was obviously in a state of distress. So it really didn't seem like Toya was the one to tie her to that tree, because if she did, she at least would have given her dog, room to lay down. Anyone who's not cruel would do that. But still, even after finding Indy, Toya was nowhere to be found. By that point, officers had joined in the search efforts. Marco had also left for a short period, but he had returned by that point to continue helping in the search. After searching for several hours, Troy, Toya's father, said that he went to sit down under some trees to take a rest. But as he sat down, he noticed a mound at the top of a sand dune on the beach, which had been surrounded by a bunch of logs. The mound looked out of place and odd, so he went over to it, where he dropped to his knees and started scooping away at the sand. It only took 3 scoops before he touched a human foot. Right away, after seeing the foot, he just had this gut feeling that it belonged to his daughter. Immediately, he leaned back and started screaming for help. He was horrified and went into a state of shock. He immediately started heading back to the parking lot, saying that he just needed to get off the beach and take a moment to collect himself. He also wanted to make sure that he didn't touch anything else around her body to make sure that the crime scene wouldn't be compromised. Of course, after calling for help, officers made their way to the area where they started to uncover the body. Of course, they could tell right off the bat that this body did in fact belong to 24-year-old Toya Cordingley. She was found wearing her bikini and the clothes that she was seen last wearing in earlier CCTV footage. However, her phone, wallet, and towel were all missing. And right away, they could tell that she suffered a horrifying, violent death. It was clear that she had been attacked. According to officers who examined her body, as well as the results from a later autopsy, Toya had suffered from numerous stab wounds all over her body. She had suffered several stab wounds to her torso, with one penetrating through her left breast. Some of these stab wounds went so deep that they penetrated her heart, left lung, and kidney, causing life-threatening organ damage. She also had a stab wound to her left thigh, a penetrating wound to her right thigh, and several abrasions across her body. She also had several cutting wounds to her hands, which are typical of defensive wounds, indicating that she tried grabbing or pushing the blade away. Then, finally, there was a large cutting wound to the front of her neck, which severed her windpipe, as well as several of the main arteries and veins in her neck. It was determined that the gashing wound to her throat is what caused her death, though it was said that she would not have died right away. This injury would have caused extensive bleeding, which would have led to her eventually bleeding out before dying. She suffered a horrifying, brutal attack before slowly bleeding out. She was then buried under the sand and left there. Her dog was tied to a tree in a different area, leaving her defenseless and unable to even sit down. Upon the gruesome discovery of Toya's body, everyone who was participating in that search were completely distraught, as you can imagine. Her boyfriend Marco was described as despondent, overwhelmed, and emotional. In that moment, everyone who loved Toya was faced with the horrifying reality that they would never see or speak to her again. Not only that, but she clearly suffered a great deal in her last moments. Of course, right away, police started their investigation into who was responsible for this vicious attack. Now, like I said, when Toya's body was found, her cell phone was not with her. That meant that investigators were unable to look at her cell phone activity on her actual phone, but they were able to obtain the cell phone data from her phone provider to give them the location data and see who she was in contact with around the time of her murder. Because again, they couldn't necessarily read the text messages, but they could see the phone numbers that she had been contacting. They also looked into the cell phone data from any potential suspects, including family members as well as Marco. They found that her location data corresponded with what I told you earlier. She went to the grocery store before heading to the beach with her dog. Her phone connected to the cell towers around Wangeti Beach by 2 p.m. as I stated, but by around 4:50 p.m., the phone showed that it was now leaving the beach, connecting to multiple cell towers heading from the direction of the beach toward Karen's before it stopped pinging by 5:17 p.m. It's believed that her phone was turned off or the battery died at that time. Then, cell phone data showed that her last text was sent at 3:17 p.m. to a number that was not Marco, but an unknown individual at that time. Data from Marco's phone then shows that he called Toya around 10 times after 7 p.m. that night. So it seems that whoever the last person Toya spoke to was not Marco, because her last text was sent to someone else hours before he is found to call her cell phone numerous times. Upon finding this out, investigators set out to find this individual. Detectives were pretty quickly able to track down this phone number to a man named Tyson Franklin, who police quickly took in for an interview. At that time, Tyson explained that he was a podiatrist and that he met Toya when she went in for an appointment. The two bonded as he examined her feet, realizing that they had a lot in common. After the appointment, the two did a Harry Potter quiz together before exchanging numbers, saving each other in their respective phones as Gryffindor and Slytherin. For the weeks that followed, the two texted back and forth. It started as friendly conversation, but they quickly realized there was chemistry between them. Before long, their friendly conversations turned into flirting and eventually sexting. During this interview, though, Tyson said that despite their sexual conversations, they never had any sort of physical sexual relations because Toya decided that nothing should happen between them. He did mention that he got the impression that Toya was not happy in her relationship with Marco and that she was planning on leaving him soon. However, after this interview, officers took his phone for examination, and they found that Tyson was not being totally honest with them. They found a text from Toya that was sent on October 15th, 2018, which said, "Literally saw you 5 minutes ago. Don't even care. It doesn't bother me what happened last night." Clearly, this text suggests that the two saw each other the prior night and that something may have happened between them. Based on this, officers took Tyson in for another interview where he admitted that the two had actually gotten together. He said that on October 14th, the two had spent the day together. They went hiking together before taking a swim at Crystal Cascades. They then got dinner together before he went over to Toya's home to spend the night. He said that the two just cuddled together all night, nothing else happened. He then went home in the early morning hours of October 15th. After he left, the two continued texting back and forth, though again, even though he tried initially saying that nothing actually happened between them, it is thought that they did have sexual relations. After looking through those text conversations on Tyson's phone, police then found something else on his phone. Something that absolutely shocked and horrified them. They found a folder on his computer which contained graphic pornography that depicted rape and murder taking place during sexual acts. They found that he had been a part of a website where users can anonymously exchange this depraved material. When later asked about this, Tyson was adamant that this had nothing to do with Toya. He didn't share any material involving her to this website. It was just something, I guess, he watched in his free time, but didn't actually act on. But after finding out this information, the whole case took a new turn. This man who was having a secret relationship with Toya, the last person to be in contact with her, also had some murder and rape fetish. I want to note that in Toya's autopsy, there was no sign of sexual assault found on her body, but that doesn't rule out that the two had a consensual sexual encounter, but that Tyson took it too far because he wanted to live out his sick fantasies in real life. Like I said, he was the last person known to be in contact with Toya before she was killed. Turns out she had sent a text to him at 3:17 p.m. the day she was murdered, saying that she was going to pick him up from the airport at around 7 p.m. that night. But phone records then showed that once he was actually at the airport, he called Toya multiple times, all which went unanswered. After she failed to show, he ordered an Uber, which took him home. This was confirmed by his cell phone data, which also showed that he was at home the rest of the day. He did not go to Wangedi Beach. Not only that, but investigators also found no footage of his car or him anywhere in the vicinity of that beach around the time of Toya's death. So even with this disgusting, depraved fetish he had, there was no evidence to suggest that he was responsible for Toya's murder. Of course, learning all this information about Tyson wasn't a good look for him, but it also wasn't a good look for Marco, Toya's boyfriend. After all, she was cheating on Marco with another man. Is it possible that he found out, freaked out, and then followed her to that beach and then murdered Toya there in a fit of rage? At this point, anything could be possible. So now let's talk about Marco's whereabouts on the day of Toya's murder. That afternoon, Marco and his dog headed over to visit a friend, Joel, up in Port Douglas. CCTV from that day showed as Marco drove his car from Cairns up north, stopping at a gas station, then a liquor store, before arriving in Port Douglas. According to Marco, as he was heading up north, he passed Wangedi Beach and saw Toya's car parked there, but he decided not to stop. She was doing her thing, he was doing his thing. He figured that she was just walking the dog on the beach, as she said, and she would return home when she was done. Once he arrived to Port Douglas, he picked up Joel, and they and Marco's dog went to Spring Creek Walking Trail for a hike. Photos on Joel's phone confirmed the timing and validity of this hike. As they finished the hike and started walking towards the car, Marco realized that his dog had wandered off and he started freaking out. They spent the following 20 to 30 minutes searching for the lost dog, but it quickly grew too dark to continue searching. At that point, Marco and Joel headed to their friends Monique and Toby's house to grab some torches so that they could see better as they searched. Monique would later say that Joel arrived to their home by around 7 p.m. that evening, but she didn't actually see Marco at the time. But Marco said that he waited in the car while Joel grabbed the torches. As he waited, he called Toya, saying that he wanted her support. He wanted to tell her what was going on, and he wanted her to tell him that it was going to be okay, but she didn't answer. After grabbing the torches, they returned to the hiking trail to continue searching for the dog. They searched for another half an hour, but they were unsuccessful in their efforts. Eventually, they left the area, heading back to Toby and Monique's house. There, Toby showed them some of the home renovations they were doing before Marco and Joel left. As I mentioned earlier, at that time, Marco was upset and frazzled. His dog had never run off like that before, and he was panicked that he couldn't find him. Not only that, but he hadn't heard from Toya in several hours, which was very unlike her. After that, they arrived back at Joel's house where they had a beer together. Marco then left, heading back towards Cairns. But as he was driving home by around 10 p.m., he passed Wangedi Beach and noticed that Toya's car was still there, which again immediately concerned him. That is when he stopped to search around for her. Again, he was already panicked and freaking out about his dog going missing, and now he's realizing that his girlfriend also might be missing. He tried to stay calm, but he had a bad feeling about the whole thing pretty much right away. After searching for a few minutes, that is when he called Toya's family to come and help search for her. Now, I want to mention that just before that last text to Tyson, Toya also texted Marco, telling him that she would be picking up a friend from the airport at around 7 p.m. that night. But Marco claimed that he didn't actually see this text until after he had started searching for her on the beach. This was a little bit strange because he had told his friends that he hadn't heard from Toya all day. Obviously, for most people, I feel like if you're waiting to hear from someone, if you're anxiously awaiting a text, you're probably going to be checking your messages to see if they sent anything. So the fact that he said that he didn't even see this text until much later that evening, that is a bit odd. But with that being said, everything else found with Marco's cell phone data confirmed everything he told investigators. He was very briefly in the area of Wangedi Beach at around 2 p.m. before he went on that hike. He then went to the friend's house briefly, then returned to the hiking area. He only returned to the area of Wangedi Beach by around 10 p.m., at which time he raised concerns over Toya's whereabouts. Of course, it's absolutely possible that he could have stopped at Wangedi Beach for a very short period, stabbed Toya in a frenzied attack, and then buried her before leaving the area and going on the hike. Then he returned later, playing the part of an upset, worried boyfriend, only raising the alarm to avoid suspicion being on him. All of that could be possible, except the one huge factor that just does not fit. Her phone leaving the beach at 4:50 p.m., the same time in which Marco was known to be in Port Douglas with a friend. It also would have been a very quick turnaround between the time of him attacking her, getting himself all cleaned up, and then heading to the friend's house. Based on how brutal and violent the attack was, the attacker would have been covered in blood. So that means that Marco would have had a change of clothes with him for whatever reason. He was then able to clean himself up very quickly before hopping back in the car and seeing his friend acting completely normally as if nothing happened. Based on the timeline of all of this, it just does not seem all that plausible that Marco is the one responsible. Hello, Editing Rachel here. As I was editing, I realized that I never gave you guys an update regarding Marco's missing dog, which I know is going to be of great concern to a lot of you, which it was for me too. So I just want to let you guys know that his dog was found about 2 days later by other hikers. So unfortunately, the dog was missing for 2 days. I'm sure it was a very scary time for the dog, but he was found and returned back home safely. So at this point, police knew that they needed to keep looking for any and all possible suspects. As far as they could see, there were a few sketchy characters in Toya's life, but none of them seemed to fit their timeline so far. Now, in addition to looking through the cell phone evidence from those within Toya's inner circle, officers also took a look at CCTV footage which showed every single car that passed through a choke point at Clifton Beach. This was a single-lane road where all cars traveling from Wangedi Beach to Cairns would be. They found that a total of 219 cars passed through that area during the time in which Toya's phone was traveling away from the beach. Then, based on further location data from other cell towers, this number was narrowed down to 70 cars. Based on this information, police started contacting the registered owners for each of these cars and were able to rule out a number of individuals. During this process, there was one vehicle that stood out to investigators, a blue Alfa Romeo 159, which was seen traveling from Issenvale to the area of Wangedi Beach on the day of Toya's death. Officers attempted to contact the driver of this vehicle numerous times, but the owner was not responding. After identifying this vehicle of interest, officers examined CCTV footage and license plate readers to track down its movements from that entire day, creating a pretty comprehensive timeline. They found that this car traveled from Issenvale through Cairns, stopping at the Cairns Central Shopping Center around 11:50 a.m. There, the driver, who was wearing a striped polo shirt, gray shorts, and flip-flops, was captured walking through the mall and eating at the food court. The vehicle then left the shopping center by 12:40 p.m. before traveling north along Capitol Cook Highway, stopping at a gas station just north of Wangari Beach. The vehicle isn't seen again until 5:14 p.m. when it is seen on CCTV footage heading south away from Wangari Beach. The direction this car traveled was the same direction that Toya's phone had traveled before it was shut off. Based on this information, detectives tracked down the driver of this car. They found that the registered owner of this car was then 38-year-old Rajwinder Singh. Rajwinder Singh was the married father of 3 children, aged 6, 8, and 1 year old. He was originally from India, but had been living in Australia for the prior 9 years, working as a nurse and living with his family in Innisfail. After making this identification, they went to his home to speak with him, but that is when they realized that he was gone and his wife had actually already reported him missing. She explained that her husband left the home on the morning of October 22nd, saying that he would be back the following day, but he didn't return as planned. At this point, investigators were really starting to feel that Rajwinder could be their man. After all, the movements of his car matched the movements of Toya's cell phone. Based on this, they did a search of the home and found a striped polo shirt, gray shorts, and flip-flops that appeared to be a match to what the man I described earlier was wearing, the man who was driving the blue Alfa Romeo. By now, it seems pretty clear that Rajwinder had to be the one driving that car that day. After connecting these dots, they set out to find Rajwinder. But as it turns out, by October 21st, the day after Toya was killed, Rajwinder booked a flight out of the country, telling the travel agent that he needed to travel urgently to New Delhi, India, because his grandfather was very ill. He had a co-worker drive him to the Cairns airport, saying that he was flying to Sydney to visit his sister. He then flew to Sydney, arriving at his sister's home at 10:30 p.m. that day. By 11 a.m. on October 22nd, he then boarded the plane in Sydney, heading to India. Since then, he stayed in India, leaving his family behind. He left his wife alone to raise the 3 children, pay the bills, and take care of everything without leaving any money or any explanation. For the years that followed, police continued their investigation into Toya's death and continued their efforts to locate Rajwinder, but they were getting no closer to finding him. So, 4 years after Toya's death, by November 3rd, 2022, police made an announcement asking the public in Australia and India to keep on the lookout for this man. They issued a $1 million Australian dollar reward for any information that leads to the location and arrest of Rajwinder Singh. Just 3 weeks after this announcement was made, by November 25th, 2022, this public plea paid off. Rajwinder Singh was spotted by New Delhi police on the outskirts of the nation's capital, where he was then captured and arrested. Then finally, by March of 2023, he was then extradited back to Australia.
After 4 years on the run, finally suspected killer Rajwinder Singh is in custody. Special officers bringing him to a New Delhi court. A fugitive no longer. His appearance vastly different to when the former nurse was caught on CCTV days after Toya Cordingley's brutal murder. He was fleeing the country, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. His trail went cold once he flew into India, but the $1 million reward with a comparable value of $25 million in that country led to a tip-off and today, finally, an arrest.
It was never a question of if, only when this day would come. Toya's murder shocked everyone in that part of the world and outraged all Queenslanders.
In a joint operation involving the AFP, Queensland and the Indian police, the fugitive was found in his home region of Punjab.
They've been relentless. They never gave up.
Police met with Toya's parents, telling them of the breakthrough before it was made public.
Elation and relief, sadness, because you might have the suspect, there's a process to go, but she will never come back.
Mum and Dad both had, a great desire for closure still.
There, he was placed into a cell with an undercover officer who posed as his cellmate. The two got to talking, and Rajwinder told him an interesting story. Rajwinder told this undercover cop that he had been at the beach that day on October 20th when he saw Toya being attacked right in front of him. He said that he saw her being brutally murdered by multiple killers, but he didn't see their faces. After witnessing this horror, he ran for his life because he didn't want to be next. He explained that after seeing this, he fled Australia because he was worried that he was going to be accused of the crime. He wanted to stay away for long enough for investigators to find and arrest the real killers. He said that he only became aware that he was an actual suspect once he was already in India, when he saw on the news that police were looking for his car. He said repeatedly that he lost everything because he had to leave after being a witness to this horrific crime. After being apprehended back into custody, a DNA sample was taken from Rajwinder. Now, at the scene where they found Toya's body, investigators collected DNA from a log that was apparently used to dam the sand to prevent it from sliding off after burying her. There were also several sticks used to further conceal the body. DNA was taken from the log and one of those sticks, and that DNA came back as matching Rajwinder. Then there was DNA taken from her fingernails, which came back with two different profiles. One belonged to an unknown individual, and one came back as a likely match to Rajwinder. Now, with the fingernail DNA, it was said that the DNA could have been degraded to the point that it was almost unusable, but they were still able to get some information from it. That being said, this DNA match was not as strong as the matches from the sticks and logs, but it's still compelling. Based on all the information I've told you up to this point, Rajwinder Singh was charged with Toya's murder. He entered a plea of not guilty, so the case went to trial, which began in February of 2025. The prosecution argued that all of the evidence they uncovered leads to one conclusion. Rajwinder murdered Toya on the beach that day. She was stabbed numerous times in a violent, frenzied attack for a reason we may never know. Now I'm going to summarize all of the evidence implicating Rajwinder up to this point, because I know there's a lot of information that leads us in so many different directions. As we know, Toya got to Wangari Beach with her dog at around 2. Her phone was pinging off the tower nearest that beach until about 4:50 p.m. The towers her phone pinged off of after leaving the beach matched the location where Rajwinder's blue Alfa Romeo was seen on CCTV. After leaving the beach, it looked like the car stopped at different areas around bodies of water, such as the Cairns northern beaches and Lake Placid. There were multiple times in which the car took U-turns and multiple detours, which was most likely Rajwinder trying to find good spots to get rid of the evidence. If he went somewhere too popular with too many people, he likely turned around and tried somewhere else so that people wouldn't see him, throwing away clothes and a phone and things like that. As we know, her wallet, towel, and phone were all missing, so it would make sense that he spent time dumping these items in places all around the area to prevent them from being found, and it worked. These items have never been recovered. Then they argued how his DNA was found on various items around her grave, as well as possibly under her fingernails. This shows that he could have been the one who buried her there, covering her in sand and surrounding her with logs and then throwing sticks over her body to conceal what he had done. Lastly, we know that just one day after Toya was murdered, Rajwinder decided to up and leave his life without any explanation. He had come to Australia almost a decade prior to make a better life for himself and his family. He had a stable job which he was good at and which he loved. He had a wife and 3 children who were his top priority up to that point. Yet one day after Toya's murder, before anything had really been announced to the public, he up and left his life, leaving everything he worked so hard for behind without a second thought or explanation. These are the actions of a man who is desperate, and the timing cannot be chalked up to a coincidence. Yes, he says that he saw Toya being attacked right in front of him, but a normal person would have called the police. It's very suspicious that he just decided to up and leave to avoid, being blamed, especially if he could have just called the police and reported what happened right then and there. The prosecution argued that each individual piece of evidence, it's not enough to say that he's responsible. But when you put them all together, it creates a crystal clear picture that Rajwinder had to be the man responsible. They didn't argue a motive because we truly don't know why this happened. But this wouldn't be the first time, or unfortunately the last time, that we can hear of a man randomly attacking a woman because he had some deep, dark fascinations or some, deep-seated hatred that came out all at once in a very violent way. Maybe she looked at him wrong and set him off. Maybe he made advances and she rejected him. Maybe she made a comment that he didn't like, or maybe he drove an hour to the beach in search of a woman to attack. Truly, we may never know what allegedly drove him to do this. On the other hand, the defense said that Rajwinder's arrest was the result of a lackluster investigation that drove investigators to become desperate enough to pin this murder on someone, anyone. They needed someone to take the fall because they needed to get this case closed. They spoke about a number of alternative suspects. There were multiple other men in Toya's life who could have been responsible. As I stated, Marco and Toya were in a 3-year-long relationship, but she started cheating shortly before her death. That gives Marco one hell of a motive. Then we have Tyson, who is the man she cheated with, who also happened to have murder and rape porn on his computer. But as I stated, neither of these men were at the beach or even near the beach at the time of the murder. There were also 2 others mentioned as possible suspects in this case, but neither were as compelling as Marco or Tyson. But the defense argued that because they weren't looked into as much as Tyson and Marco, that they can't definitively be ruled out. There are other suspects who were at the beach that day who may have had connections to Toya, who just were not investigated thoroughly enough. Realistically, the only person who came close to being a plausible suspect was Marco, who the defense really did focus their attention on. They said that yes, he called 000, but that was only to get the attention off of him. They said that he didn't search for Toya half as long as he searched for his dog. Why? Because he already knew where Toya was buried, and his dog going missing earlier in the day was just a weird happenstance. Multiple friends of Toya's came forward to discuss how she planned on leaving Marco soon, and he was realizing that she would be leaving him. Neither of them had really ever been alone, so there was a lot of anxiety surrounding this whole thing. So the whole idea is that Toya was planning on leaving Marco. She cheated, and Marco found out. All of this led to Marco hitting a boiling point, which led him to violently murdering his girlfriend. So that's pretty much everything that was argued on both sides. After making their closing arguments, the jury was sent off for deliberations. They deliberated for 2.5 days before coming back and deciding that they were deadlocked. They could not reach a unanimous decision. Some felt that there just was not enough evidence and too much reasonable doubt to pin this violent, brutal murder on Rajwinder. So this resulted in a mistrial. This means that Rajwinder will continue to remain in custody as the defense and prosecution work their cases in preparation for another trial.
Grieving parents leave court no closer to getting closure. There was disappointment in the Supreme Court in Cairns as a jury declared they were deadlocked, unable to reach a unanimous decision on whether or not former nurse Rawinda Singh murdered Toya Cordingley. The 24-year-old was walking her dog along the secluded Wongetti beach when she was stabbed 26 times. Her throat was also slashed. Her father, Troy, discovered her body partially buried in the sand the following day. During his trial, prosecutors allege Mr. Singh randomly killed her before fleeing the country, abandoning his wife and 3 children. The Crown's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including Mr. Singh's DNA allegedly found under Miss Cordingley's nails and on a stick in her burial mound. CCTV footage also allegedly matched the movements of Mr. Singh's car and her phone after her death. Mr. Singh's defence team argued their client had witnessed someone else kill her and that police ignored other leads. After spending more than 2 days deliberating, those tasked with deciding his fate told the judge they could not reach a verdict.
Of course, this is just devastating for her family, knowing that they'll have to sit through yet another trial, hearing the horrific details of what happened to Toya. They thought that they would be getting justice after 6 years of waiting, but now they will have to continue to wait. This is obviously better than completely exonerating Rajwinder, but this means that the prosecution will need to rework the case and figure out what they need to find to really argue their side. If they want a conviction, they're gonna need to build a more solid case. But as of right now, that is where the case sits. I do understand why the jury came back with this decision. The way I laid out the case to you is much more concise than what the jury heard. They were presented with all of these other suspects, all who had their own motives and dirty laundry. This absolutely muddies the water, given that the man on trial doesn't even have a motive. So I think, to me, if the prosecution wants to win this next trial, they're going to need to find something that gives them a better idea of his motive. Did he have any violence in his past? Any history of mental illness? Any suspicious Google searches? They're going to need to find something else to really push this case in the direction they want it to go, or an alleged killer may go free. Because at the end of the day, I do think that the evidence does point to Rajwinder, and based on all of the other cases I've covered in my time as a true crime reporter, I know that people sometimes commit these crimes for absolutely no reason. There's no reason why his DNA should be anywhere around the crime scene or her body, and him leaving the country right after really makes me think it was him. But that's what I think about all this, so now I want to hear what you all think. Do you think Rajwinder is responsible, or was it someone else? Could it have been Marco? And what do you think of the hung jury? If you were on that jury, would you have found him guilty? Because honestly, with the evidence we have, I'm not sure if I would have. Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you liked this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn that notification bell on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.